The life of the world's most notorious terrorist. The morning of September 11, 2001, dawned with clear skies and a sense of peaceful serenity. Then, in a horrific instant, that calm was shattered. Two hijacked passenger planes crashed into the World Trade Center's Twin Towers in New York City, Tower 1 and Tower 2. Both structures collapsed within 90 minutes of the attacks. Approximately 90 minutes later, another hijacked plane slammed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense in Washington, D.C., causing partial structural damage and a collapse. This marked the first attack on U.S. soil since the surprise Japanese attack in World War II, leaving a profound wound on the American government and its people. White House officials were desperate to identify the perpetrators, especially after the Taliban immediately denied involvement. However, the government needed to provide an explanation to the public. Thus, a month later, the U.S. President declared a war on terror with a clear objective: eliminate Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden, the global terrorist leader of al-Qaeda, hailed from a wealthy Saudi Arabian family and was once considered the wealthiest bachelor in the world. Born in 1957, he was the 17th of 52 siblings in a prosperous Saudi construction family. While the large number of siblings was largely due to his father's multiple marriages rather than his mother, bin Laden's father, with his astute business sense and loyalty to Saudi rulers, cultivated close ties with the Saudi royal family. King Faisal even issued a royal decree, assigning all future construction projects to the bin Laden family's construction company. This gave him a virtual monopoly on building mosques and other religious structures in Saudi Arabia and several other Arab states. By the 1960s, he had amassed a fortune exceeding $5 billion, making his large family perfectly normal. Thanks to his father's efforts, bin Laden naturally became a wealthy young man. After graduating from university, he joined the family business, thriving in the oil and construction sectors, with his personal wealth reaching billions of dollars. This should have been the story of a determined young man becoming a billionaire and proving himself. Yet bin Laden's life mirrored that of many other ruthless figures. His affluent life couldn't satisfy him. In 1979, the Soviet Union launched a war in Afghanistan, resulting in 1 million deaths and 6 million people displaced. The Arab world vehemently opposed the Soviet invasion. As a fervent Muslim, bin Laden also joined this fight, even temporarily putting his studies on hold. Bin Laden and like-minded friends traveled to Afghanistan and participated in the Islamic Jihad against the Soviet Red Army until their withdrawal in 1988. Bin Laden lived there for approximately 10 years. It was during this time, in 1988, that bin Laden founded al-Qaeda to repel the Soviet invaders. Al-Qaeda initially had good relations with the US and Western countries, even receiving numerous weapons and military equipment, as the enemy of their enemy was considered a friend. However, the relationship between the two sides underwent a 180-degree turn. In 1991, the Gulf War erupted. While primarily a conflict between the US and Iraq, Saudi Arabia, as a neighboring country, grew concerned. As the war began, bin Laden approached the Saudi royal family and urged them, "Stop buying Dongfeng missiles from China. I have al-Qaeda, entrust me with the defense of our nation." However, the Saudi royal family was not naive. They feared that if they entrusted national defense to al-Qaeda, Saudi Arabia might one day become an extremist military government. Thus, they politely declined. An unexpected situation then unfolded. After rejecting bin Laden, the Saudi royal family agreed to allow the US to build a military base on their territory. This was utterly unacceptable to bin Laden. He felt he represented righteous Muslims, and from its inception, al-Qaeda aimed to unite Arab strength against imperialist aggression. He questioned why the royal family would act as pawns for the US military, why outsiders should interfere in Muslim affairs, and why the US was clearly seeking hegemony in their land. This was an insult to Islam. As a staunch devotee of Islam, he was determined to oppose the US, which ultimately led to the 9/11 attacks. Speaking of 9/11, this terrorist attack was truly devastating, claiming over 2,900 lives, and economic damages were estimated to exceed $200 billion, equivalent to 2% of the US GDP at the time. Americans felt a profound loss of security, like someone who had just gone through a painful breakup. While many Americans owned firearms, this was a terrorist attack using planes crashing directly into buildings, something no one could defend against. The U.S. Department of Defense declared it the most severe attack on U.S. territory in over 200 years of national history, with the death toll surpassing the total casualties from the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in World War II. Following the incident, military forces across the U.S. were immediately placed on the highest alert. When the 9/11 attacks occurred, U.S. President Bush was reading to children at an elementary school in Florida. His bodyguard approached and whispered a few words in his ear. Upon learning of the serious terrorist attack, Bush was visibly confused, silent, and shocked. President Bush tried to remain calm and hastily left the school under the escort of Secret Service agents to avoid the possibility of further terrorist attacks. President Bush immediately boarded Air Force One and moved between several military bases before landing at Offutt Air Force Base. In a video conference with the CIA director, he was informed that the mastermind behind the terrorist attacks was almost certainly bin Laden. This is why Bush launched the war in Afghanistan, as mentioned at the beginning of the video. They were determined to find bin Laden at all costs, dead or alive. Meanwhile, bin Laden was enjoying wine and being a guest of the Taliban. At that time, the Taliban controlled almost all of Afghanistan during the Civil War, and the situation remains similar today. When bin Laden founded al-Qaeda years prior, he had become acquainted with Omar, the leader of the Taliban. From then on, they began a close relationship. In fact, one of Omar's wives was bin Laden's daughter, making bin Laden Omar's father-in-law. Knowing bin Laden was with the Taliban, Bush threatened Omar, demanding he surrender bin Laden or face consequences himself. However, Omar was not easily intimidated. How could he surrender his father-in-law, especially a father-in-law who arrived with substantial funds? This was truly a dilemma. He wanted to keep both the person and the money. Seeing that bin Laden would not surrender voluntarily, President Bush declared to the world, "We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. All will pay a price." Thus, the U.S. officially sent troops into Afghanistan under the guise of counterterrorism, determined to find bin Laden. However, what the U.S. didn't anticipate was that this search would last 10 years. Before the war in Afghanistan began, 7 CIA agents flew to a valley in northeastern Afghanistan to formally cooperate with the Northern Alliance, another armed group in Afghanistan. The Northern Alliance, already worried about being unable to defeat the Taliban, saw this as a golden opportunity and gladly agreed. On October 7, 2001, U.S. forces, along with the United Kingdom and other allied forces, including the aforementioned Northern Alliance, simultaneously attacked multiple Taliban positions. A month later, the Taliban had virtually disintegrated. With American planes, tanks, and artillery, the Taliban, armed only with AK-47s and bayonets, stood no chance. Despite this, bin Laden remained well, living comfortably. To provoke the Americans, he even sent a videotape to Al Jazeera television, informing the Americans that he was living very comfortably, eating well, and was in good health. He then challenged President Bush, warning of more terrorist attacks. Upon seeing the tape, President Bush felt immense anxiety and unease. To vent his anger, Bush summoned the Secretary of Defense and the CIA director and reprimanded them, finally shouting, "Where are your cannons? Bring them here." After that, the U.S. military began a fierce bombing campaign in Afghanistan. There was a fixed bombing run every day, and ground troops constantly searched. Although this operation did not capture bin Laden, it was not entirely in vain. The third highest-ranking member of al-Qaeda was killed. Realizing the intense American military hunt, bin Laden personally led his subordinates to flee. So, where did bin Laden go? In fact, he hid in the mountainous region on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, a place called Tora Bora. This was an ideal hiding place with a complex, maze-like terrain and numerous caves, very suitable for guerrilla warfare. Furthermore, bin Laden had previously fought against the Soviet army here, so he was very familiar with the area. The Americans paid no attention to the terrain advantages bin Laden relied on. They believed that these advantages were insignificant in the face of absolute military power. Therefore, American planes relentlessly bombed the area. They were confident that bin Laden could not escape this mountainous region. With the mentality of better safe than sorry, the U.S. military spared no bombs in attacking suspected caves where bin Laden might be hiding. In addition to conventional weapons, they also used GPU-28 laser-guided bombs, a type of bunker-buster missile that could penetrate 6 meters of concrete or 30 meters of earth before exploding. They also used the famous Tomahawk cruise missiles, known for their high accuracy, with an alleged margin of error of no more than 10 meters within a 2,000-meter range. The U.S. military continued such bombardments for a month. Under this relentless assault, bin Laden finally could not bear it any longer. On December 11, the U.S. military learned through radio communications that bin Laden had escaped yet again. The following week, bin Laden sent another videotape to Al Jazeera television, sending warm regards to those who cared about him, including President Bush and his family. From then on, he no longer used any communication devices. All contact with the outside world was through letters. The American capture operation reached an impasse. No one knew where bin Laden had gone. The U.S. military held bombs in their hands but had no idea where to throw them. They considered offering a huge bounty of $25 million, or sending spies to infiltrate al-Qaeda, or monitoring all of Afghanistan, but none of these plans made progress. Besides occasionally releasing a few videos to prove he was still alive, bin Laden seemed to have vanished from the earth in 2002. The situation changed slightly in 2002. At the Guantanamo Bay prison in Cuba, CIA agents were legally interrogating an Afghan terrorist. This individual, unable to withstand torture, finally revealed crucial information. Bin Laden's courier was known by the alias Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti. Of course, the CIA didn't know if this information was true or fabricated. With a better safe than sorry attitude, the CIA immediately began an investigation. However, there were hundreds of people with this name. It wasn't until 2009 that the CIA identified a man named Kuwaiti living in the city of Abbottabad, northern Pakistan. By this time, President Bush had retired, and 8 years had passed since 9/11. Although the CIA wasn't sure if Kuwaiti was connected to bin Laden, they still sent numerous agents to Abbottabad. After several weeks of investigation, they discovered Kuwaiti lived in a 3-story villa in the wealthy area of Abbottabad, the largest building in the neighborhood. What was strange was that the villa had no phone or internet connection. Living with Kuwaiti was a man named Abu Faraj al-Libi. These two brothers often kept to themselves, rarely going out, which raised the CIA agents' suspicions. A few weeks later, the agents planned to install cameras on trees around the house to monitor it 24/7 without being detected. But just before installation, Kuwaiti had people cut down all the trees around the house. This left the CIA agents both embarrassed and fearful, as if they had already installed cameras, they likely would have been discovered watching the house. Therefore, the CIA continued to have agents monitor the house from a distance. Several weeks later, a surveillance report landed on CIA Director Panetta's desk. The report indicated that the family never left out household trash but burned all of it in the yard. Additionally, the villa's perimeter walls were taller than usual and topped with barbed wire. The largest room on the top floor had no windows. There were many children in the yard, but none of them went to school, which was highly unusual for a high-end villa complex in Pakistan. The final lines of the report stunned the CIA director. Based on the amount of laundry drying in the yard, it seemed a third family also lived in the villa, and the head of that family was very likely bin Laden. Immediately afterward, CIA Director Panetta rushed to the White House to report to President Obama. Although they couldn't confirm whether bin Laden was in the house, with a better safe than sorry attitude, Obama decided to launch a major operation to eliminate bin Laden. If successful, he would be renowned; if not, it was no big deal, and the search could continue. There was nothing to lose either way. At 2 p.m. on May 1, 2011, Obama and senior military and government leaders gathered in the White House Situation Room. their eyes focused on the large screen in front of them. This real-world operation relied on SEAL forces as the main contingent to prevent information leaks in this covert operation. The U.S. did not contact local Pakistani authorities. The entire operation was commanded by the CIA. At 1:45 a.m. local time, 11 p.m. the previous day, 24 members of the SEAL team, divided into two groups, boarded two Black Hawk helicopters from a U.S. military base in Afghanistan, flying 300 kilometers to Pakistan. Upon reaching the villa, the tail of the first helicopter accidentally hit a wall. But this did not affect the morale of the members. After all, they and the American people had been waiting for this day for far too long. The 20 members from the emergency-landed helicopter, wearing night vision goggles, stormed the villa. Guarded the main entrance to prevent bin Laden from escaping. On the first floor of the villa, they opened fire on anyone they encountered. After killing everyone on the first floor, they quickly went to the second floor and shot and killed a young man who was later confirmed to be bin Laden's 23-year-old son. Finally, they found bin Laden hiding in a room. The special forces said nothing and immediately fired 2 shots from an M4 rifle. One of his wives proactively rushed out to shield him, but 2 5.56 mm rounds still passed through bin Laden's body. His body was then transported out of Pakistan by helicopter. When Al-Qaeda armed forces arrived to assist, the U.S. Special Forces had long since departed. The damaged helicopter was also destroyed on site. After confirming that the person killed was bin Laden through DNA comparison, the U.S. decided to bury his body according to Islamic law and customs. Bin Laden's body was washed, wrapped in white cloth, and prayed over in a ceremony with the help of an Arabic interpreter. However, to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine for his followers, the U.S. military decided to bury him at sea. This thorn in America's side, along with his brutality, bloodshed, and hatred, finally sank permanently to the bottom of the ocean. To some extent, bin Laden was a highly ambitious organizational leader. For a long time, he was a warrior who abandoned power and wealth to embark on a struggle against imperialist aggression. He once said, "My cause needs money, but I myself do not." However, extremism and religious fundamentalism transformed actions intended for protection into aggression and terrorism. After bin Laden's death, Al-Qaeda became a purely religiously extremist terrorist organization, occupying cities in Yemen and establishing branches in India. They declared they would save Muslims in the region from injustice and oppression. However, they treated the lives of others as worthless. If bin Laden were alive, one wonders whether he would consider this the fulfillment of his ideals or merely a joke.